The clinking of silverware against fine china was the only sound that dared to break the tension in the Davenport dining room. At the head of the table, Catherine Davenport, the perfect hostess, in a sapphire silk dress, watched her husband's mistress. The woman, Chloe, had a smile that dripped with condescension, a victor's smirk aimed right at Catherine. She thought she had won. She thought this dinner was her official welcome into the family, the final nail in the coffin of a tired marriage. Across the table, my husband Robert beamed at her, oblivious, but the silence stretched thin, pulled taut by a secret only I knew. I was waiting for the chime of the doorbell for the final guest whose arrival would turn that smug smile into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. The game was mine, and the final move was about to be played. The scent of blooming night jasmine and old money clung to the air in the Davenport estate. It was a perfume Catherine had grown accustomed to, a constant reminder of the life she lived, but no longer felt she owned. Their home, a sprawling colonial revival mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut, was less a home and more a museum of a perfect life. Each room was curated, each piece of art meticulously chosen mostly by her, to project an image of effortless wealth and stable happiness. It was a beautiful, convincing lie. For 15 years, Catherine had been the perfect partner to Robert Davenport, the visionary CEO of Exion Tech. She had been his anchor as he built his empire from a garage startup to a global powerhouse. She'd hosted the dinners, charmed the investors, and managed the charities, all while gracefully stepping back to let his star shine brightest. She had put her own career as a promising art historian on indefinite hold, convincing herself that his success was their success. But over the past year, the gilded cage had started to feel suffocatingly small. The cracks in their perfect facade were beginning to show fine as spiderwebs, but just as intricate. Robert was distant, his phone always angled away from her, his nights at the office growing longer and more frequent. He'd explain it away with talk of a new product launch, a hostile market, the endless pressures of being at the top. He would touch her cheek with cold fingers and call her honey, the endearment now sounding hollow, a placeholder for genuine affection. The first tangible piece of evidence arrived innocuously, a receipt from a high-end jeweler fallen from his coat pocket. It was for a diamond tennis bracelet, a piece far too flashy for Catherine's classic taste. Her birthday had passed months ago, and their anniversary was still far off. When she'd casually asked if he'd been shopping for a client's wife, he'd frozen for a fraction of a second, a flicker of panic in his eyes, before the smooth corporate mask slid back into place. Just a preemptive thank you for a major board member's wife, he'd said, his voice a little too smooth. Greasing the wheels, you know how it is. She knew how it was. She also knew Robert was a terrible liar when caught off guard. Then came the scents. Not the familiar masculine fragrance of his Creed cologne, but a sweet, cloying perfume that smelled of tuberose and ambition. It lingered on his shirts when he came home late, a ghostly signature of another woman. She'd hold the expensive cotton to her nose, the floral scent a punch to the gut, a confirmation of the betrayal she felt coiling in her stomach. The final straw was the phone call. She'd picked up his ringing phone from the nightstand one Saturday morning while he was in the shower. The caller ID was just a single initial C. She hesitated, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Her finger hovered over the screen before she declined the call. When Robert came out of the bathroom, wrapped in a towel, he saw the phone in her hand, and his face hardened. "What are you doing?" he'd asked, his voice sharp and accusatory. "Your phone was ringing." "A C," she said, keeping her own voice even, a calm she did not feel. He snatched the phone from her. "It's a colleague. We're in a crisis with the server rollout in Asia. You shouldn't be snooping, Catherine. He called it snooping. She called it stumbling upon a truth he was trying to hide in plain sight. That night she didn't sleep. She lay beside him, feeling the chasm between them widen into a canyon. The man she had loved, the life she had helped build, was all becoming a mirage. She was not a fool, and she would not be made into one. The idea for the dinner party came to her in the cold pre-dawn light. It was an annual tradition, a formal dinner for Robert's parents, George and Margaret Davenport. They were old-world patriarchs, people who valued legacy family, and above all appearances. This year, Robert had insisted on adding a special guest. Chloe Jensen, he had announced a week ago, not meeting her eyes. She's my VP of strategy, an absolute rock star. She's been instrumental in the new Triton project, and I think it's important for Mom and Dad to meet the future of the company. Catherine had felt a cold dread settle over her. She'd heard the name before whispered among the executive wives, the brilliant, beautiful, and ruthlessly ambitious Chloe Jensen. She typed the name into her laptop, and the screen filled with images of a sharp-featured blonde with eyes that seemed to hold a challenge. There were articles praising her business acumen, photos of her at industry events, always standing just a little too close to Robert. The future of the company. The words echoed in Catherine's mind. It was a test. He was flaunting his affair, daring her to object, daring her to make a scene. He was trying to normalize her presence, to slowly phase Catherine out, and this woman in. A slow, cold fury began to burn where her grief had been. He thought she would simply crumble, that she would accept this humiliation with quiet dignity. He had underestimated her. He had forgotten the intelligent, strategic woman he had married. She would host this dinner. She would play the part of the gracious wife. But it would not be Chloe Jensen's coronation. It would be a reckoning, and it would unfold on her terms in her house under the watchful eyes of the family whose name Robert was so carelessly tarnishing. She stood up and walked to her vanity, looking at her reflection in the ornate silver mirror. The face looking back was tired, the eyes shadowed with pain, but there was a flicker of something else there now. Resolve. The gilded cage had been of her own making, but she still held the key, and she was about to unlock the door, not to escape, but to let the wolves in. The decision to hire a private investigator felt like a betrayal of the woman she used to be, the woman who believed in trust in the sanctity of her vows. But that woman was gone, replaced by a pragmatist, forced to navigate a battlefield she never wanted to enter. She found Mr. Peterson through a discreet referral from her lawyer, a man who specialized in complex marital asset protection. The name itself was a cold euphemism for the ugly reality of high-stakes divorce. Mr. Peterson was nothing like the grizzled detectives from old movies. He was a man who blended in with a mild face graying hair and an entirely forgettable demeanor. He wore a simple, well-pressed suit and spoke in quiet, measured tones. His office was a sterile, anonymous space in a downtown skyscraper, far from the prying eyes of their social circle. "Mrs. Davenport," he began, his voice calm and professional. "Before we proceed, I need you to be certain. Once we start down this path, the information we find cannot be unfound. It will change things. Permanently." "I am aware," Catherine said, her hands clenched in her lap. "I need the truth, Mr. Peterson. All of it. I need to know what I am up against." She provided him with everything she had. Robert's schedule, his flight details for business trips, the name Chloe Jensen, and the license plate number of the unfamiliar Tesla she had once seen, parked in his private spot at the office. She felt a wave of shame as she handed over the details, as if she were the one committing an act of espionage. But the shame was quickly replaced by a cold sense of purpose. This was not about jealousy anymore. It was about survival. The first report landed in her secure encrypted email inbox a week later. It was concise, professional, and utterly devastating. The file contained a series of photographs. The first few showed Robert and Chloe Jensen leaving the Exion Tech Tower, their body language professional but close. Then there were photos of them at a secluded table in the Oak Room, a restaurant Robert had once claimed was too stuffy for their date nights. In the photos, Chloe was laughing, her hand resting on Robert's arm. He was looking at her with an expression Catherine hadn't seen on his face in years, a look of pure, unguarded admiration. The final photos were the ones that made her breath catch in her throat. They were taken outside a boutique hotel in the city, a discreet place known for its privacy. Robert was opening the door for Chloe, his hand on the small of her back. The timestamp confirmed it was a Tuesday afternoon when he was supposed to be in a board meeting. Mr. Peterson's summary was brief. Subject Robert Davenport and Ms. Chloe Jensen appear to be engaged in an ongoing extramarital affair. Meetings are regular, occurring 2 to 3 times weekly. Recommend continued surveillance to establish a comprehensive pattern and identify further assets. Catherine closed her laptop, a wave of nausea washing over her. Seeing the photographic proof was different from merely suspecting. The abstract fear had solidified into a cold, hard reality. The woman with the condescending smile she'd seen in press photos was sleeping with her husband. She was the one receiving the diamond bracelets, the one sharing intimate dinners, the one who was slowly and methodically erasing Catherine from her own life. She called her best friend Jessica Riley. Jessica was a sharp, no-nonsense art gallery owner who had known Catherine since college. She was the only person Catherine trusted implicitly. "It's confirmed, Jess," Catherine said, her voice trembling despite her efforts to remain steady. "He's having an affair with her, the vice president." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line, followed by a string of curses directed at Robert that made Catherine almost smile. "That absolute swine," Jessica seethed. "After everything you've done for him, what are you going to do? Cat, are you going to confront him? Do you want me to come over and help you throw his bespoke suits onto the lawn?" "No," Catherine said, the cold resolve returning, pushing past the pain. "A scene is what he expects. It's what she expects. They think I'll get hysterical, emotional. They're counting on it. It would make it easier for them to paint me as the unstable, scorned wife. So what's the plan? You can't just let this happen." "I have this dinner party," Catherine explained, pacing the length of her sunroom. "The one for his parents. He's invited her." Jessica gasped. "He what? Oh, that arrogant monster. He's bringing his mistress to meet his parents at your dinner table. He's framing it as a professional introduction, showcasing his star executive." Catherine said, her voice dripping with irony. I think this is my opportunity. I can't fight him on his turf in the boardroom or in the courts, not yet. But the home, the family, that's my turf. I need to do something that he and she will never see coming." "What are you thinking?" Jessica asked, her voice a mix of concern and intrigue. "I don't know yet," Catherine admitted, "but I need more information. I need to know everything about Chloe Jensen, not just the professional resume she polishes for the world. I need to know who she really is." She ended the call with Jessica and wrote back to Mr. Peterson. Her instructions were simple and direct. Forget Robert for now. Focus entirely on Chloe Jensen. I want to know everything. Where she lives, who her friends are, her family, her financial situation, her romantic history. Every skeleton in her closet. I want it all. As she pressed send, Catherine felt a shift within herself. The victim was receding, and in her place, a strategist was emerging. Robert and Chloe thought they were playing a simple game of chess where she was just a pawn to be sacrificed. They were about to find out she was the one controlling the entire board. For the next 2 weeks, Catherine lived a double life. On the surface, she was the dutiful wife discussing menu options with the caterer, selecting the perfect vintage of Bordeaux from their cellar, and confirming the floral arrangements for the Davenport family dinner. She exchanged pleasantries with Robert, a carefully constructed mask of civility, hiding the tempest raging within her. He seemed relieved by her compliance, mistaking her calm for surrender. This was, he likely thought, going to be easier than he'd imagined. Beneath the surface, her encrypted inbox became the center of her universe. Peterson's reports on Chloe Jensen started to paint a picture not of a simple home wrecker, but of a woman as calculating and ambitious as Robert himself. Chloe had clawed her way up the corporate ladder with a potent combination of intelligence and ruthlessness. She had a small, chic apartment in a trendy part of the city, paid for by a salary that was handsome, but not extravagant enough to explain her collection of designer handbags or her frequent weekend trips to St. Bart's, trips that often coincided with Robert's business conferences. The reports detailed her life with forensic precision, her gym schedule, her favorite coffee shop, the small circle of friends she kept. But it was all a carefully curated image. There were no messy relationships in her past, no public missteps. She was clean, polished, and seemingly invulnerable. Catherine started to feel a flicker of despair. What leverage could she possibly have against a woman so meticulously self-controlled? The breakthrough came on a rainy Tuesday evening. Catherine was reviewing the latest file from Peterson, a dry report detailing financial background checks. She scrolled through pages of bank statements and credit card summaries, the numbers a meaningless blur. Then one line item caught her eye. It was a recurring monthly payment from Chloe's account, a direct debit of $3,500 to a joint checking account. The name on the joint account was C. Jensen and D. Porter. Her heart skipped a beat. Who was D. Porter? She scanned the document again. A few lines down there was another connection, a mortgage statement for a modest suburban house in a town 30 miles away. The mortgage was in 2 names, Chloe Jensen and Daniel Porter. Catherine stared at the screen, the pieces clicking into place with a sickening thud. She immediately replied to Peterson's email, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Who is Daniel Porter? The reply came less than an hour later, and it changed the entire game. Daniel Porter is Chloe Jensen's husband. They have been married for 5 years. He is a senior accountant at a mid-sized firm, Finley & Rowe. They have no children. Public records indicate they are still legally married and cohabiting at the address on the mortgage, though our surveillance suggests Ms. Jensen spends approximately half her nights at her city apartment. Porter appears to be unaware of the affair. Attached is his photograph. Catherine clicked open the attached file. The man who stared back was ordinary. He had kind eyes, slightly thinning brown hair, and a gentle, unassuming smile. He was wearing a fleece vest over a button-down shirt, looking like a man who enjoyed hiking on the weekends and coaching Little League. He was the complete antithesis of Robert Davenport's slick, predatory charisma. He looked like a good man, a man who was being played for a fool just as she was. A wave of emotions washed over her shock pity. And then a white-hot, clarifying rage. This wasn't just an affair. This was a whole other level of deceit. Chloe wasn't just a mistress trying to secure a rich husband. She was a married woman, hedging her bets, building a new life with Robert's money and power, while keeping her safe, stable husband waiting in the wings. She was playing them both. The plan, which had been a nebulous concept of revenge, suddenly sharpened into focus. It was audacious, it was brutal, and it was perfect. A simple confrontation would be messy and unsatisfying. A quiet divorce would let them both off too easily. But this was a way to expose them both for everything they were in front of the very people whose opinions they valued most. She picked up her phone and dialed Jessica. "I have it," Catherine said, her voice low and steady. "I have the weapon." "What is it?" Jessica asked, her voice hushed with anticipation. "Her name is Chloe Jensen, and she has a husband." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "No, you're kidding me." "His name is Daniel Porter. He's an accountant, and he has absolutely no idea what his wife is doing." "Oh, Kat," Jessica whispered. This is biblical. I need a plausible reason to get him to my house for dinner on Saturday night." Catherine said, her mind already working, spinning the threads of her intricate web. "A reason Robert wouldn't question." "The foundation," Jessica said instantly. "Your literacy foundation. You're launching the annual fundraising drive. You need a pro bono audit or some financial planning advice. His firm Finley & Rowe could be a new corporate sponsor you're courting." It was perfect, plausible, professional, and completely above suspicion. It would place Daniel Porter in her home as a legitimate guest, an unsuspecting pawn in a drama whose climax was known only to her. Catherine spent the next day making the arrangements. She called the main line at Finley & Rowe using her full name and the name of her foundation. She was, as she expected, put through to a senior partner. She explained her proposal, a potential partnership, a request for some preliminary advisory work. She mentioned she'd been given the name of one of their senior accountants, Daniel Porter, as a man with a keen eye for non-profit finances. The partner was delighted. A chance to get in with the Davenports. He'd have Daniel Porter call her back within the hour. When Daniel called, his voice was just as she imagined, polite, professional, and slightly nervous. He was utterly starstruck to be speaking with Catherine Davenport. She was charming and gracious, explaining the situation and the upcoming family dinner. "It's dreadfully last minute, I know," she said, her voice laced with the perfect amount of apologetic sincerity. "But my husband and his parents are so keen to hear about this year's fundraising strategy, and I thought what better way than to have the expert there to walk them through it. It would just be a brief informal chat over dinner, a chance for us all to get acquainted." Daniel was flustered and flattered. A dinner invitation to the Davenport estate. It was a massive opportunity for his firm, for his career. "Of course, Mrs. Davenport," he stammered. "I would be honored. I'll just need to check with my wife, make sure we don't have plans." Catherine's blood ran cold for a second. "Of course," she said smoothly. "Family first." A few hours later, he called back, his voice beaming. "All clear, Mrs. Davenport. My wife has a work thing she can't get out of anyway, so the evening is free. I'll be there." A work thing. Catherine felt a bitter smile touch her lips. Chloe Jensen's work thing was a dinner party where she planned to solidify her position as the next Mrs. Davenport. She had no idea her husband would be there to witness her coronation. The final piece was in place. All the actors were set to take the stage. Catherine was no longer the director hiding in the wings. She was the star of the show, and she was ready for her performance. The day of the dinner party dawned with a crisp autumnal chill. The sky over Greenwich was a painter's canvas of grey and pale blue, and the manicured lawns of the Davenport estate were dusted with a light morning frost. For anyone else, it was a perfect Saturday. For Catherine, it was the day of the reckoning. She moved through the morning with a strange, almost out-of-body calmness. The storm of her emotions, the grief, the rage, the anxiety had settled into a hard, dense core of purpose in the pit of her stomach. There was no more room for doubt. There was only the plan. She personally oversaw every detail. She instructed the florist to create arrangements of white hydrangeas and eucalyptus, beautiful but funereal. She chose the menu with deliberate care, a rich lobster bisque to start, followed by a rack of lamb. All dishes that required concentration and a steady hand, dishes that were difficult to eat when one's world was collapsing. The wine she selected was a 1998 Chateau Margaux, the year she and Robert were married. A subtle, poignant touch that only she would understand. In the late afternoon, she retreated to her dressing room. She laid out her chosen armor, a simple, impeccably tailored sheath dress of sapphire silk. The color was bold, regal. It was not the soft pastels Robert preferred her to wear. It was the color of a deep, cold ocean. She sat at her vanity, the silver-backed brushes and crystal perfume bottles glinting in the light. This was the same vanity where she had cried silent tears just weeks ago. Now, looking at her reflection, she saw a different woman. The softness around her eyes had been replaced by a steely clarity. The tremor in her hand was gone. Robert came in as she was clasping a string of pearls around her neck, his own wedding gift from 15 years ago. He was already in his suit, looking as handsome and confident as ever. He smiled at her reflection in the mirror. "You look stunning, Catherine," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "Ready for tonight?" "Of course," she replied, her voice even. "I want to make a good impression on your guest." He caught the slight emphasis on the word your, but chose to ignore it. "Chloe is brilliant. You'll like her. And it's important for Mum and Dad to see the caliber of people I have at Aixion. It will reassure them. Reassure them that he had a succession plan in place for both his company and his life," she thought. "I'm sure it will be a very illuminating evening for everyone," she said, turning to face him. She adjusted his tie, her fingers brushing against his neck. The gesture was intimate, familiar, and utterly devoid of warmth. For a moment he seemed to lean into her touch, a flicker of the old connection in his eyes. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by the cool calculation that now defined him. "Good," he said, stepping back. "I'll go down and check on the wine. Don't want Dad complaining about the temperature again." As he left, Catherine allowed herself a single deep breath. The performance was about to begin. Downstairs, the house was glowing. Soft light emanated from every lamp. The fireplaces in the drawing room and dining room crackled merrily, casting dancing shadows on the polished hardwood floors. The long mahogany dining table was set for 5, Robert herself, his parents George and Margaret, and the guest of honor, Chloe Jensen. A 6th-place setting remained conspicuously absent, waiting in the wings of the pantry, ready to be placed at the perfect moment. George and Margaret Davenport arrived first, punctual as always. George was a stout, imposing man with a booming voice and a firm belief that the Davenport name was synonymous with integrity. Margaret was his quiet, observant counterpart. A woman of few words, she missed nothing. Her sharp blue eyes surveyed the room, the floral arrangements, and Catherine's dress, giving a slight approving nod. Catherine, my dear, Margaret said, kissing the air beside her cheek. Everything looks wonderful as always. You have a gift for these things. Thank you, Margaret. I do hope it's a memorable evening, Catherine replied, the double meaning hanging in the air, unheard by all but herself. Robert played the part of the proud host, pouring his father a glass of vintage scotch and engaging him in a loud discussion about the stock market. Catherine guided Margaret to the sofa, making small talk about the upcoming charity gala. It was a scene they had played out 100 times, a perfect portrait of familial bliss. And then the doorbell chimed. Robert's face lit up. "Ah, that must be Chloe," he said a little too eagerly. He strode to the grand foyer to answer the door himself, a gesture of familiarity that did not go unnoticed by his mother. Catherine stood her back to the fireplace, her hands clasped loosely in front of her. She could hear Robert's enthusiastic greeting, followed by the light, confident tones of a woman's voice. And then they were standing in the archway to the drawing room. Chloe Jensen was even more striking in person. She was tall and slender in a form-fitting black dress that was just a touch too daring for a family dinner. A diamond tennis bracelet. The diamond tennis bracelet sparkled on her wrist. Her blonde hair was swept into a sleek chignon, and her smile was bold and dazzling. But her eyes, as she scanned the room, held a cool, appraising quality. They flickered past George and Margaret, landing on Catherine. And she smiled. It was not a polite, deferential smile. It was a smile of ownership of victory. It was the smile of a woman who believed she was looking at her past, a relic soon to be replaced. In that single expression, she was telling Catherine, "I'm here. I've won. This is my house now, my family, my man." Catherine met her gaze and smiled back, a serene, placid smile that revealed nothing. "Miss Jensen," she said, her voice like cool water. "Welcome to our home. We are so delighted you could join us." The politeness of it, the sheer unruffled calm, seemed to momentarily wrong-foot Chloe. She had expected tears, hostility, a scene. She had not expected grace. But she recovered quickly. "Please call me Chloe," she purred, gliding into the room and extending a hand to George and then Margaret. "It's an absolute honor to finally meet you both. Robert speaks of you constantly." The air crackled with unspoken tension as they moved into the dining room. Robert, playing the fool, seated Chloe to his right in the place of honor, traditionally reserved for his mother. Margaret's eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch, but she said nothing. The trap was set. The players were in their places. All Catherine had to do now was wait for the final unsuspecting guest to arrive. The conversation around the mahogany table was a masterpiece of subtext and veiled hostility. On the surface, it was polite dinner-party chatter. Beneath it was a battle of wills. Chloe Jensen was a skilled performer. She directed the conversation with the precision of a seasoned executive, seamlessly transitioning from a discussion of Aexion's market shares with George to praising Margaret's charity work. She was charming, witty, and utterly captivating. She spoke of Robert with a proprietary reverence, recounting stories from the office that highlighted his genius, her tone implying an intimacy that went far beyond the boardroom. "Robert has this incredible ability to see 10 steps ahead of everyone else," she said, her eyes gleaming as she looked at him. "He's a true visionary. It's a privilege to be on his team." "We're certainly proud of his accomplishments," George boomed, clearly impressed by this brilliant young woman who so openly admired his son. Catherine watched a silent observer at her own table. She played the role of the perfect hostess, ensuring glasses were filled and plates were cleared, her movements fluid and unhurried. She listened to Chloe's sycophantic praise of her husband, a man who was actively dismantling their life together. With every triumphant glance Chloe sent her way, every subtle touch of Robert's arm, Catherine felt not pain, but a growing, chilling sense of power. They were digging their own graves, and she was simply letting them have the shovels. "Catherine, you're very quiet this evening." Margaret observed her sharp eyes, missing nothing. She had noticed the seating arrangement, the overly familiar way Chloe spoke to her son, and the icy calm of her daughter-in-law. Before Catherine could respond, Chloe cut in with a laugh that was light and tinkling, but held an edge of steel. "Oh, I'm sure we're boring her with all this shop talk. It must be difficult to keep up when you're not in the corporate world." It was a direct hit, a condescending jab at Catherine's life, painting her as a kept woman, out of touch and irrelevant. Robert shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but said nothing to defend his wife. He was complicit in her humiliation. Catherine simply smiled, a small enigmatic curve of her lips. "On the contrary," she said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the tension. "I find it fascinating. It takes a great deal of focus to pursue one's ambitions so single-mindedly." She let her gaze rest on Chloe for a beat too long. "I'm sure your family must be incredibly proud of all you've sacrificed for your career." Chloe's smile tightened. It was a subtle parry, a reminder that Chloe's life existed outside this room, a fact she seemed keen to forget. The lobster bisque was served. As Chloe lifted her spoon, she made her next move. "You know, this house is just breathtaking," she sighed, looking around the opulent dining room. "The architecture, the art. It has such wonderful bones. You could do so much with it if you just modernized it a bit." She was redecorating. In her mind, she was already mistress of the house, envisioning how she would tear down Catherine's life and build her own upon its ruins. Robert, completely oblivious to the undercurrents, jumped in. "Chloe has a fantastic eye for design. She's been consulting on the aesthetics for our new corporate campus." "I can imagine," Catherine said, taking a delicate sip of her soup. "A fresh perspective can be so invigorating." The minutes ticked by, each one stretching the tension thinner. Catherine could feel it building a palpable force in the room. Her heart was beating a steady, heavy rhythm against her ribs. It was almost time. She knew from Mr. Peterson's report that Daniel Porter was meticulously punctual. His train would have arrived at 7:15 p.m., and a pre-arranged car would have him at their gate by precisely 7:30 p.m. She glanced at the grandfather clock in the hall. It was 7:28 p.m. As if on cue, the faint, distant chime of the doorbell echoed through the house. Every head at the table turned. Robert looked confused. "Are we expecting someone else?" he asked Catherine, a hint of annoyance in his voice. He hated surprises. George and Margaret looked at Catherine expectantly. Chloe's face was a mask of curiosity, her spoon frozen halfway to her lips. This was the moment. The precipice. Catherine placed her napkin on the table beside her plate. She stood up, her movements calm and deliberate. "Yes," she said, her voice ringing with a newfound clarity that made everyone stare. "I am. A final guest." She smiled, a genuine, brilliant smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "I took the liberty of inviting a business associate of my own. I hope you don't mind." Without waiting for a reply, she turned and walked out of the dining room, her silk dress whispering against the floor. She walked through the grand foyer, her steps echoing on the marble. She reached the heavy oak door and took one final steadying breath. She opened it, and there on the doorstep, looking slightly overwhelmed by the grandeur of the house, was Daniel Porter. He was holding a leather briefcase and smiling his kind, unassuming smile. "Mrs. Davenport," he asked, his voice polite. "I'm Daniel Porter. I hope I'm not late." "Mr. Porter," Catherine said, her voice warm and welcoming. "You've arrived at the perfect time. Please come in. Everyone is dying to meet you." Catherine led Daniel Porter from the grand foyer toward the archway of the dining room. He was understandably nervous, clutching his briefcase like a shield. His eyes wide as he took in the soaring ceilings and expensive art. He was a man from a different world, a world of spreadsheets and quiet suburban streets, now thrust into the lion's den. For a fleeting moment, Catherine felt a pang of guilt for what she was about to do to him. But it was a necessary cruelty, a detonation required to clear the rubble of all their lives. As they stepped into the dining room, all conversation ceased. The four people at the table stared at the newcomer. Robert's expression was one of pure confusion, tinged with irritation at this interruption. George and Margaret looked on with polite curiosity. But it was Chloe's face that Catherine watched. As Daniel stepped into the full light of the chandelier, Chloe was mid-laugh at something Robert had said. Her head was thrown back, her lipstick-stained mouth open. Her eyes sparkling with triumph. Then her eyes met Daniel's. The transformation was instantaneous and terrifying. The color drained from her face, leaving a sickly, waxy pallor. Her triumphant smile didn't just fade. It collapsed, melting away, as if the muscles in her face had suddenly ceased to function. Her jaw went slack, and her eyes widened in pure, unadulterated horror. The wineglass in her hand trembled its contents, sloshing dangerously close to the rim. In that 1 second, the queen of the corporate world, the victor in this domestic war, became a cornered, terrified animal. Daniel, for his part, was simply bewildered. His gaze swept the table until it landed on his wife. "Chloe," he said, his voice a mixture of shock and confusion. "What are you doing here? You said you had a strategy off-site in Stamford." His words hung in the air, heavy and damning. Chloe couldn't speak. She just stared at him, her chest rising and falling in shallow, panicked breaths. Robert finally found his voice, looking from Chloe's horrified face to the bewildered man in the doorway. "You two know each other?" he asked, his CEO's mind struggling to process data that didn't compute. It was Catherine who answered, her voice cutting through the thick, suffocating silence. She stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Daniel's arm, a gesture of alliance. "Everyone," she said, her voice as calm and clear as a bell. "I'd like you to meet Daniel Porter. He's a brilliant accountant from Finley & Rowe who is graciously advising my foundation." She paused, letting the first piece of information settle before delivering the masterstroke. "He is also Chloe Jensen's husband." The word husband dropped onto the table like a grenade. George Davenport's jaw dropped. Margaret's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes sharp and discerning, darting from Chloe to her son, the ugly truth dawning on her face. Daniel looked from Catherine to his wife, his kind face crumpling in confusion and dawning hurt. "Husband Chloe, what is going on? Who are these people?" But it was Robert who finally understood. He stared at Chloe, his face a mask of disbelief, turning slowly to fury. He had been played. He, Robert Davenport, the master of the universe, had been made a fool of. His prize, his rock star, VP, was not a free agent. She was married. To this man. This ordinary, unassuming accountant. The humiliation was a poison, and it was spreading through him visibly. "Your husband," Robert choked out the words, tasting like ash in his mouth. He turned his furious gaze on Chloe. "You're married," Chloe finally snapped out of her paralysis, her survival instincts kicking in. "Daniel, this is a misunderstanding," she stammered, pushing her chair back and rising shakily to her feet. "This is a work dinner. Robert is my boss." "Your boss," Daniel said, his voice trembling now with the first stirrings of anger. "You told me you were in Stamford. You lied to me." He took a step forward, his eyes locking on the glittering diamond bracelet on her wrist. "Where did you get that?" "We can't afford that." The accusation was raw, real, and devastatingly public. Catherine stepped back, her work done. She was merely the conductor. The orchestra of chaos was now playing a symphony of its own. "She lied to you, Robert?" Catherine said, her voice soft but carrying to every corner of the room. "Just as you've been lying to me." She walked over to a sideboard and picked up a slim manila folder she had placed there earlier. She opened it and slid a photograph across the polished table toward Robert's father. It was a picture taken by Mr. Peterson, showing Robert and Chloe kissing passionately outside the boutique hotel. George Davenport picked it up. He stared at it for a long moment, his face turning a deep apoplectic red. He slammed the photo down on the table. "Robert, what is the meaning of this? In your own home, with your wife present. And she lied to you, Daniel." Catherine continued her gaze now on the heartbroken accountant. She slid another photo across the table to him. It showed Chloe alone entering the jeweler's where the bracelet was purchased. The receipt was tucked neatly beside it. "She is a very ambitious woman. It seems she was hedging her bets, seeing which husband offered the better long-term investment." The room imploded. "Get out!" Robert roared, pointing a trembling finger at Chloe. All his affection had curdled into pure, venomous rage. He was not angry because of the betrayal, but because his reputation was being destroyed in front of his parents. "Get out of this house, you sanctimonious bastard!" Chloe shrieked back, her carefully constructed facade shattering completely. "Don't you dare act like a victim. You were begging me to leave him. You told me you were going to leave her." Daniel let out a choked sound, a gasp of pure pain as he finally understood the full scope of the betrayal. He looked at his wife, the woman he had loved and supported, and saw a stranger. Margaret Davenport, who had been silent until now, stood up. Her voice, though quiet, was colder and sharper than any shout. She spoke to her son, but her eyes were fixed on Catherine. "Robert, you have brought a profound and disgusting shame upon this family. You have humiliated your wife and dishonored our name." She then turned her gaze to Chloe. "And you young woman are filth." With that, she turned and walked stiffly out of the room. George, after one last look of utter disgust at his son, followed her. The dining room was a war zone. Chloe was sobbing a mixture of rage and terror. Robert stood shaking with fury. Daniel looked utterly broken, his face pale with shock. Catherine remained standing by the sideboard, calm amidst the wreckage she had wrought. She had not raised her voice. She had not cried. She had simply presented the truth, and the truth had been a more powerful weapon than any emotional outburst could ever be. The smug smile was gone from Chloe's face, replaced by a mask of utter ruin. Robert's arrogant confidence was shattered. The game was over, and she had won. The aftermath of the dinner party was swift and brutal. The sound of George Davenport's departing Bentley roaring down the gravel driveway was the closing bell on Robert and Catherine's life as they knew it. Chloe, hysterical and exposed, tried one last desperate appeal to Robert. "We can fix this, Robbie," she pleaded, reaching for his arm. He flinched away from her touch, as if he'd been burned. "Don't you ever speak to me again," he snarled, his voice low and dangerous. The public humiliation had severed any feeling he had for her. She was no longer an asset. She was a liability of catastrophic proportions. He pointed toward the door. "Leave. Now." Daniel Porter, who had been standing frozen in a state of shock, finally moved. He looked at his wife, his eyes hollow with a pain that was awful to witness. "Chloe," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Give me your keys. I'll meet you at home. We have to talk." There was no anger left in him, only a vast, empty landscape of sorrow. Without another word, a sobbing Chloe stumbled out of the dining room and out of the house, her dream of becoming the next Mrs. Davenport, turning to ash around her. Daniel gave Catherine one long, searching look, a look that held a universe of pain, but also a flicker of gratitude for the terrible truth, before he turned and followed his wife out into the cold night. And then there were two. Robert and Catherine stood at opposite ends of the magnificent dining room, the wreckage of the carefully planned meal, a mirror of the wreckage of their marriage. The air was thick with the ghosts of accusations and the stench of betrayal. Robert finally turned to her, his face a thunderous mask of fury. "Are you happy now?" he spat. "You couldn't just leave with dignity, could you? You had to create this circus to humiliate me in front of my own parents." Catherine met his rage with an unnerving calm. "You seem to be confused, Robert," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "You are not the victim here. You humiliated me every day for the past year with your lies. You humiliated me by bringing your mistress into my home. You humiliated our marriage, our history. What I did tonight was not humiliation. It was clarification." She walked slowly toward him, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. "You thought I was just a part of the decor, something to be managed and eventually replaced. You grossly underestimated me." "I underestimated your capacity for cruelty," he shot back. "No," she corrected him. "You underestimated my capacity for survival. You and she started a war. You just didn't expect me to fight back with a better strategy." She stopped just a few feet from him. "My lawyer will be in touch with yours on Monday morning. I want the house. I want the art collection we curated together. And I want a settlement that reflects the 15 years I invested in your career, in this family, in a partnership you treated like a disposable asset. Given the circumstances and the testimony of your parents and Mr. Porter, I suspect you won't want to fight me in a public court." His face paled. She had him. The threat of a messy public divorce with his formidable mother, likely testifying against him, would be devastating to Aexian Tech's stock price and his own carefully crafted reputation. He was trapped. "You have planned this all," he whispered, a note of grudging awe in his voice. "I learned from the best," she replied, a bitter smile on her lips. "You taught me everything I know about ruthless strategy." She turned her back on him, then a final act of dismissal, and walked out of the room, leaving him standing alone amidst the ruins. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal meetings and quiet goodbyes. Robert moved out his things packed up by professionals, his presence in the house fading until it was nothing more than a ghost. The divorce was brutally efficient and quiet, just as she had predicted. Robert, under immense pressure from his father, agreed to all her terms, to avoid a public spectacle. Chloe Jensen disappeared. She was fired from Exion Tech the following Monday, her corporate ascent ending in a spectacular crash. Catherine heard through the grapevine that Daniel had filed for divorce immediately. Chloe had lost both her husband and her millionaire, her ambitious gamble, leaving her with nothing. Catherine, meanwhile, began the slow, deliberate process of reclaiming her own life. She had the entire house repainted, erasing the neutral beiges Robert had loved and replacing them with warm, vibrant colors. She sold the 1998 Chateau Margaux and used the money to fund a scholarship for young female art historians. One afternoon, a month after the dinner, she was in her study, which she had converted back into a workspace for her own research when she received a call from Jessica. "Are you sitting down?" Jessica asked. "What is it?" "The gossip columnist for the Post just called me for a comment. Apparently, George Davenport has forced Robert to take an extended sabbatical and has installed an interim CEO at Ixion. The board is citing personal reasons for his departure." Catherine felt a slow, satisfied smile spread across her face. The final domino had fallen. She ended the call and looked around her study. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. On her desk were books on Italian Renaissance art, her old passion, now her present reality. She was no longer Catherine Davenport, the CEO's wife. She was just Catherine, and for the first time in a very long time that felt like more than enough. The gilded cage was gone, its bars melted down by the fire of a woman who had refused to be broken. She was free. And there you have it, a story not just of betrayal but of incredible strength and strategic brilliance. Catherine Davenport could have chosen to be a victim to cry and crumble as her world fell apart, but instead she chose to be the architect of her own justice. She turned her pain into power and used her enemies' arrogance against them in the most spectacular way possible. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many people wear a mask of politeness while hiding a core of steel? What would you have done in her shoes? Would you have confronted him, or would you have set the stage for a reckoning he would never forget? Picture a sprawling driveway lined with century-old oak trees, their branches forming a grand, shadowy canopy. At the end of this quiet approach stands the majestic Beauclair mansion, its marble columns gleaming under the moonlight. In the hush of midnight, a sleek black limousine pulls up to the front steps, delivering the triumphant millionaire Donovan Pierce. He's not alone. Clinging to his arm is Serena Quinn, a dazzling model with secrets of her own. Donovan steps out, brimming with confidence, prepared to flaunt his latest conquest. Little does he know, behind those massive double doors, his pregnant wife already waits, with a pair of earth-shattering surprises. Donovan Pierce was born in Santa Barbara, California, in the early 1980s. He was the youngest son of a middle-class family whose only luxury was a subscription to National Geographic. His parents, Randall and Josephine Pierce, both taught at the local community college. Though they were hardly wealthy, they instilled in Donovan the idea that knowledge could open doors that money alone could never pry open. Donovan, a sharp-eyed, wiry kid with a stubborn streak, found solace in reading about faraway lands. He dreamed of traveling to Africa, exploring the Amazon, and someday having enough money to live in a grand estate of his own. In high school, Donovan's natural charm made him popular among peers. Though not an exceptional athlete, he excelled in debate and showed a fierce determination to win any argument. Teachers praised him for his intelligence and tenacity, but behind the confident demeanor lay an unsatisfied hunger. He wanted more, always more. This insatiable thirst for success would become his defining trait, one that propelled him through life at breakneck speed. By the time he graduated, Donovan had his sights set on Stanford University. Through scholarships and financial aid, he secured enrollment in the prestigious institution. There, he fell in love with economics and business. By senior year, he was running an investment club with 40 members. They pooled their modest funds and tested the volatile waters of the stock market. Donovan didn't just want to break even, he wanted to crush the market. Armed with cunning strategies and long nights studying charts, he managed to bring their returns to remarkable heights. Word spread about his uncanny ability to see market trends before they became mainstream. Upon graduation, Donovan accepted a position at a well-known financial firm in New York. Only 22, he was already sitting in conference rooms with high-profile clients, including the likes of Warren Buffett's associates and other billionaires scouting fresh talent. Donovan took every opportunity he could to glean wisdom from these industry titans. His nights were spent with spreadsheets, analyzing stock movements, and his days were consumed by endless networking. Over the next decade, Donovan rose to prominence. He founded his own investment firm, Pierce Capital Management, and took his net worth from a humble few $1,000s to tens of millions, then hundreds of millions. Eventually, his name appeared on the covers of financial magazines. He became a recognized figure, invited to speak at conferences worldwide. Yet Donovan's ambition was boundless. He set his eyes on surpassing every record in the book and building a personal life that reflected his success. It was during this lofty ascent that he met Elizabeth Radcliffe, a descendant of old money. Elizabeth was a well-educated philanthropist, known for championing causes related to women's health. She was radiant in a quiet way, elegant, thoughtful, and with a moral compass that ran deeper than Donovan's relentless drive. Her mother, Caroline Radcliffe, was once part of a philanthropic circle involving the late Princess Diana, donating to charitable organizations across Europe. The Radcliffe heritage included a storied estate in the Hamptons and connections to aristocrats in England. Donovan was attracted to Elizabeth's poise and the air of dignity she carried wherever she went. Their relationship started gently long walks by the shoreline in East Hampton, quiet dinners at exclusive clubs, intellectual discussions about the future of finance and philanthropy. Before long, Donovan realized that Elizabeth wasn't just another accessory to be paraded around. She was a pillar of wisdom and stability, someone who kept him tethered to his humanity when greed tugged him off-center. The world watched in fascination when Donovan and Elizabeth wed in a grand ceremony at the Radcliffe family's estate. Media outlets splashed their pictures across the front pages, calling it the merger of new money and old world grace. In an unexpected twist of sincerity, Donovan's vows to Elizabeth were heartfelt. He promised to love, protect, and treasure her, never letting wealth overshadow his devotion to her and any future family they might have. But the shadows of desire and ambition sometimes morph into darker forms. Even as Donovan soared to greater financial heights, he found himself haunted by a restless energy. He wanted excitement, passion, anything to satiate an appetite for novelty that neither Elizabeth's serene presence nor his legitimate business triumphs could fully feed. And so the seeds of betrayal were sown. Elizabeth's life had revolved around philanthropic ventures long before she met Donovan. But her marriage brought new challenges. She struggled to find a balance between supporting Donovan's insatiable ambitions and preserving her own identity. With each passing year, Donovan's name grew in the financial sector, which meant more publicity, more parties, more demands. Elizabeth attended numerous galas as the gracious hostess. She wore dazzling gowns, smiled for photos, and patiently listened to endless conversations about stocks and corporate expansions. In private, Elizabeth was not as meek as the media painted her to be. She had her convictions. She often confronted Donovan about certain investments that seemed questionable, environmentally damaging ventures, profits extracted from borderline unethical deals. Donovan would smile and reassure her that everything was within legal bounds. "This is how we fund your charities," he teased. "We do well, and then we do good." Most of the time, Elizabeth would sigh, letting the conversation fade. She recognized that Donovan's approach to business was a far cry from her father's genteel style. Still, she believed in her husband's underlying decency. Years into the marriage, Elizabeth yearned for a child. At first, Donovan brushed off the topic. "Let's solidify the business," he would say. "Let me cross a few major milestones, and then we'll talk about starting a family." Deep down, Elizabeth suspected Donovan was afraid to be pinned down by the responsibilities of fatherhood. He thrived on risk spontaneity and the freedom to jet off to Europe or Asia at a moment's notice if a deal demanded it. However, the unstoppable march of time and a near-death experience, Elizabeth's father had a sudden stroke, galvanized them. Realizing how fragile life could be, Donovan agreed they should try for a child. In the following months, Elizabeth discovered she was pregnant, and the new reality thrilled her. She glowed with expectancy, her philanthropic work pivoting to focus on maternal health and child welfare. Donovan seemed happy about the news at first, but his reaction lacked the effusive zeal Elizabeth had hoped for. She told herself it was simply Donovan's nature to remain collected, even about momentous life changes. During the pregnancy, Elizabeth took refuge in the quiet comforts of Beauclair Mansion, an estate the couple had purchased in the countryside of upstate New York. Surrounded by lush forests and rolling hills, it provided the perfect retreat from the swirling chaos of Manhattan life. There, away from public scrutiny, Elizabeth could focus on preparing for motherhood. Donovan often visited on weekends, always claiming he was too busy with urgent business deals during the week. As months rolled on, Elizabeth began to suspect that Donovan's late nights and business trips might not all be about closing deals. Even so, Elizabeth tried to cast aside her doubts. She had twins on the way, 2 lives growing within her 2 blessings that she believed would knit her and Donovan closer together. She wrote in her diary each day, documenting every emotional shift, every flutter in her belly, and every dream she had of a future filled with children's laughter, echoing through the mansion's halls. In these private moments, Elizabeth recounted her grandmother's stories of how love in a marriage was tested in unthinkable ways, but devotion and faith often carried couples through the darkest storms. She had no idea that her test would come so soon, or in such a heart-wrenching manner. Serena Quinn was the kind of woman people instinctively watched as soon as she walked into a room. With almond-shaped hazel eyes and wavy auburn hair cascading to her waist, she emanated a fiery energy that demanded attention. She had been raised in a modest household in San Diego, her father a retired Marine, her mother a struggling painter. Despite their limited means, Serena's parents poured their hearts into supporting her talents, whether it was ballet painting or modeling. By 18, Serena signed with an upscale modeling agency and discovered a taste for the finer things in life. The swirling lights of fashion, shows designer gowns, and the glittering stares of cameras dazzled her. She lived for backstage parties and exclusive VIP events where she rubbed shoulders with celebrities and moguls. Over time, she learned how to charm men of power. That charm wasn't always innocent. For Serena, it became a method of survival and advancement in a cutthroat world. If she played her cards right, she could secure financial stability that might otherwise elude her. Her path crossed with Donovan Pierce on a private yacht off the coast of Monaco. Donovan was there for a high-profile tech conference, and Serena had been hired to model for a European luxury brand. The second Donovan saw her laughing on the deck, wearing an opulent emerald gown that clung to her figure, he felt an old, forbidden spark ignite. He introduced himself with characteristic smoothness, Donovan Pierce, of Pierce Capital Management. Might I ask whose stunning presence I'm fortunate enough to share this deck with? Serena knew the name anyone in high society did. She smiled coyly. Serena Quinn. A pleasure to meet you, Mr. Pierce. Over champagne flutes, they exchanged banter about the future of cryptocurrencies and the enthralling but superficial nature of fashion. She was witty. He was enthralled. One conversation led to another, and soon the shimmering lights of Monaco's coastline faded into the hush of the night. Donovan found himself lost in Serena's raw magnetism, a stark contrast to Elizabeth's graceful composure. Despite knowing full well that he was married, his ring was conspicuous, and the media had documented his marriage extensively. Serena fueled Donovan's flirtation. To her, men like Donovan offered not just adventure, but entry into circles with deeper pockets. The moral transgression didn't worry her. She had grown accustomed to seeing powerful men cheat on their wives, and in her line of work, infidelity was treated as a negotiable taboo. Before the yacht docked, Donovan and Serena shared a clandestine kiss on the upper deck, hidden from prying eyes by the summer darkness. Donovan told himself it was just a fleeting moment of indiscretion. He was a man on top of the world. Why shouldn't he savor every flavor of pleasure life offered? But fleeting infatuations can quickly grow into an all-consuming secret. When Donovan returned to New York, he found excuses to see Serena again, ostensibly for business, though they both knew it was anything but. She became his shadow at exclusive clubs, late-night penthouse soirees and business trips where he needed a companion to keep him entertained. He showered her with designer handbags, diamond jewelry, and even helped her land more lucrative modeling gigs. Serena, for her part, clung to Donovan's generosity, offering him the rush of a hidden romance he couldn't get from his stable married life. Weeks turned into months, and their affair deepened. Serena reveled in the luxurious life Donovan provided: 5-star hotels, exotic vacations, lavish gifts. Meanwhile, Donovan craved her presence like a drug, ignoring any semblance of guilt. He told himself Elizabeth was preoccupied with her charities. Her pregnancy, there was no harm in letting off some steam. In a moment of recklessness, Donovan invited Serena to spend a weekend at Beauclair Mansion. It was an impulsive plan, born from a chaotic swirl of desire and pride. After all, Elizabeth was supposed to be spending those days in Manhattan for a friend's baby shower, or so Donovan believed. Little did he realize Elizabeth had cut her city trip short, too exhausted to endure the social rigmarole, and determined to relax in her own home. Destiny was about to orchestrate a collision of secrets, lies, and revelations that would upend everyone's lives. Under the silver glow of a crescent moon, Donovan's limousine glided up to Beauclair Mansion's gates. The estate's sweeping landscape looked hauntingly beautiful. Tall cypress trees swayed, and the ornate fountain at the entrance sparkled with watery moonbeams. Serena leaned against Donovan in the back seat, her manicured nails lightly tracing patterns on his arm. She giggled. "I can't believe you own all of this. It's like a castle from a fairy tale." "Wait until you see the inside," Donovan bragged. your jaw will drop. He had always wanted to show off Beauclair to Serena. It was one of his ultimate trophies, a testament to how far he'd climbed from his humble upbringing. He had told the chauffeur to arrive late, betting that the staff would be minimal at this hour. Normally, Elizabeth might have been at the mansion, but Donovan was confident she was in Manhattan until Monday. He anticipated a weekend of unrestrained passion and indulgence, free from prying eyes and moral repercussions. To ensure privacy, Donovan had earlier texted Mrs. Hathaway, Beauclair's long-standing housekeeper, telling her to take Sunday off. He explained that he had a private gathering with an important client. Mrs. Hathaway dutifully obeyed, leaving only a skeleton crew on night duty. Donovan had also given strict instructions to keep the gates closed and to remain out of sight unless summoned. Everything was orchestrated like a stage play, with Donovan as the star performer. However, Donovan's carefully crafted plan crumbled the moment the limousine approached the circular driveway. The grand double doors of the mansion swung open, and out stepped Elizabeth. Clearly pregnant, her usually gentle face etched with outrage. Her hand rested protectively on her belly, the fabric of her pale blue maternity dress fluttering in the night breeze. The overhead carriage lights illuminated her figure, making her look both ethereal and formidable. Donovan felt his breath catch in his throat. Confusion and dread erupted within him. For a moment, Serena was just as stupefied, her eyes darting between Donovan and the furious woman on the threshold. "Who is that?" she whispered sharply, though deep down she suspected the answer. No one spoke as the driver opened the door. Donovan stepped out first, feeling as though he were walking into a vortex of shame and disbelief. Elizabeth's voice finally cut through the silence. "So it's true," she hissed. "All the late nights, the secret phone calls, I tried to tell myself I was just being paranoid." Donovan opened his mouth but couldn't form words. Elizabeth's expression twisted a lethal mix of heartbreak and anger. Her gaze flicked to Serena, who also emerged from the limousine, her face partially hidden by large designer sunglasses she'd neglected to remove. For a second, Serena contemplated slinking back inside the car, but she was too frozen to move. Beneath the mansion's elegant facade, the entire world was about to unravel. Inside Beauclair's sweeping foyer, marbled floors gleamed under a chandelier of crystal teardrops. Donovan stood rooted near the grand staircase, Serena a few feet behind him, feeling acutely like an intruder. Elizabeth, with tears in her eyes, demanded answers. Her voice echoed off the polished surfaces, driving home the magnitude of this confrontation. "How long has this been going on?" she shouted, eyes locked on Donovan. "How many times have you lied to me?" Serena's gaze darted nervously. She cleared her throat and decided on an apology, but it sounded hollow even to her own ears. "I'm so sorry." I didn't realize Elizabeth cut her off. Didn't realize what exactly? That he has a wife? That I'm carrying his children? Her voice trembled with bitterness, and her hands pressed against her swollen belly. Donovan finally snapped out of his stupor. "Elizabeth!" He began stepping closer. "I didn't mean for any of this." She pulled away, tears shimmering on the brink. "Don't come near me." At that moment, thunder rumbled in the distance. It felt as though nature itself lamented the betrayal unfolding within Beauclair's walls. Donovan's mind churned, searching for a plausible explanation, an apology, a gesture that might quell the fury and heartbreak swirling through the foyer. Yet nothing he could say would excuse what he'd done. Behind him, Serena said softly, "I'll just get my things and go." She aimed for an exit strategy, hoping to salvage any shred of dignity. But Elizabeth wasn't done. "So you leave now, And what then? Another rendezvous in some penthouse next week? Another weekend in a mansion you both think you own? She shot Donovan a look of pure venom. You want to embarrass me in front of the entire world, Donovan, because the paparazzi will eat this alive. There's no hiding from it. A hush enveloped them, broken only by the faint pitter-patter of rain starting outside. Serena gripped her handbag, panic in her eyes. Donovan realized in that instant the severity of his situation. A pregnant wife, a mistress, and a public image that could collapse under the weight of scandal. Before anyone could speak again, Elizabeth crumpled to her knees, a sharp cry escaping her lips. Donovan rushed to her side, alarmed. "Elizabeth!" he exclaimed. "What's wrong?" Her face contorted in pain, her arms instinctively encircling her belly. I think something's wrong with the babies." The sight of Elizabeth in apparent distress jolted Donovan's paternal instincts. He forgot about Serena, about the affair, about everything else. He scooped Elizabeth into his arms. "We need to get you to the hospital," he said, voice trembling. At his instruction, the still-present chauffeur quickly rearranged plans to drive to the nearest emergency room. By now, Serena was shaking, unsure if she should stay or slip out unnoticed. Ultimately, she followed them to the limousine perched uncomfortably in the back seat, while Donovan cradled Elizabeth. The ride felt like an eternity each second, thick with tension and fear. Never had Donovan felt so powerless. This was not a financial crisis he could fix with a quick injection of capital or a brilliant stock trade. He was on the brink of losing everything he claimed mattered to him, and possibly even losing the unborn children he had so carelessly taken for granted. They arrived at St. Bernardine's Medical Center in the dead of night, the doors of the emergency ward sliding open under harsh fluorescent lights. Nurses rushed Elizabeth into an examination room, Donovan trailing closely behind. He hovered by her side, watching with dread as monitors beeped and doctors administered IV lines. Serena lingered in the waiting area, hands clasped tightly, face pale. She felt starkly out of place. A nurse, noticing her anxious demeanor, whispered, "Are you family?" Serena shook her head, barely managing a polite smile. She took a seat, struggling with a mix of guilt, fear, and resentment. Resentment toward Donovan for putting her in this humiliating position. Guilt for playing a role in what might be a catastrophic medical emergency. Inside the examination room, the obstetrician delivered cautious news. Elizabeth was having contractions prematurely, possibly triggered by emotional stress. The babies were at risk if her blood pressure didn't stabilize soon. Donovan felt a crushing weight. This was the real consequence of his duplicity. Not just an angry spouse or a ruined social reputation, but the potential harm to innocent lives. With quiet efficiency, Elizabeth was transferred to a private room in the maternity wing. Donovan sat by her bedside, stroking her hand, feeling both helpless and regretful. He tried to speak to offer some comfort, but Elizabeth flinched away. Her eyes flickered with pain and betrayal. She was a woman who had given her heart, body, and trust to a man who'd taken all three for granted. Hours crawled by. The hospital's white corridors and antiseptic odor provided the backdrop for Donovan's introspection. He had always prided himself on having control over markets, over deals, over his life's narrative. Yet here he was, powerless. In the waiting area, Serena wrestled with her own turmoil. She texted a friend. "Stuck at a hospital. Disaster night. Call you later." She couldn't bring herself to leave. A part of her needed closure, needed Donovan to acknowledge her. But as dawn approached, she realized how naive that longing was. She overheard bits of conversation between nurses. Elizabeth was stabilized, the twins appeared unharmed for now. But the emotional damage was incalculable. Eventually, Donovan emerged from Elizabeth's room, dark circles under his eyes. He approached Serena, who stood up hastily, her posture stiff. In the empty corridor, they exchanged hushed words. "Are you okay?" Serena asked, her voice trembling with concern. "Not really." Donovan admitted, his tone frayed. "Elizabeth's resting now. The babies seem to be okay, but it was close. I can't." He swallowed, unable to complete the thought. Serena nodded slowly, tears threatening to spill. "I didn't want this to happen." Donovan let out a shaky breath. "Go back to the mansion, or a hotel. I'll make arrangements for you. But I can't leave Elizabeth." Serena searched his face, hoping for some signal that their relationship mattered. Instead, she saw a broken man, guilt-ridden and desperate to cling to his wife and unborn children. Words felt futile. She only managed a nod before turning to walk away, the corridor lights flickering overhead like a silent judgment. In that moment, Donovan understood that the life he thought he could compartmentalize was shattered. There would be no neat division between his respectable existence with Elizabeth and his clandestine affair with Serena. Everything had collided, and the fallout would test every inch of his fortitude and Elizabeth's. News travels fast in privileged circles. By mid-morning, Elizabeth's parents, Andrew and Caroline Radcliffe, arrived at the hospital in a flurry of concern and indignation. Caroline, her posture ramrod straight, confronted Donovan in the corridor. "You liar!" she hissed, jabbing a finger at his chest. "You made promises, Donovan. My daughter's life and the lives of my grandchildren are at risk because of your disgraceful behavior." Andrew, a gentle man by nature, seemed older and more frail than usual, grief etching lines across his face. "I trusted you," he said softly, his voice laden with disappointment. "You were the one who insisted on waiting for children until you were ready to be a father. And now this Donovan bowed his head, too ashamed to meet their gazes. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "Truly I am. Nothing I say will justify what happened." Caroline gave a scornful laugh. "That's about the only honest thing you've said so far." With Elizabeth stable but emotionally shattered, the medical staff advised minimal stress to prevent another crisis. It was agreed that for now, Donovan could stay at the hospital. He was, after all, Elizabeth's next of kin, but the Radcliffes made it clear they'd watch him like hawks. Every hour, Donovan checked in on Elizabeth, who maintained a stony silence. She gazed out the window, tears occasionally sliding down her cheeks. Sometimes Donovan tried to hold her hand or whisper an apology. Each time, she pulled away. When evening arrived, the Radcliffes insisted on a family discussion without Elizabeth. Donovan, Andrew, and Caroline convened in a small hospital cafeteria, the smell of coffee and antiseptic heavy in the air. The conversation was tense voices, kept to a low hush. Caroline wasted no time. "Donovan, we want you to leave Elizabeth alone until she recovers. You'll take care of her medical expenses, of course, but you're to stay away until she explicitly asks for you." "Understood." Donovan's mouth felt dry. "Elizabeth is my wife. I can't abandon her in the hospital." Andrew softened his tone. "We're not saying abandon her. We're saying give her space. Right now, your presence might be doing more harm than good." Caroline's eyes narrowed. "Who knows how many indiscretions you've had behind her back?" As far as I'm concerned, you have a lot of explaining to do. Yes, Andrew agreed. And perhaps to a divorce lawyer as well. The word divorce lodged like a bullet in Donovan's chest. He'd never considered that Elizabeth might actually leave him and take the children with her. The possibility ripped open a chasm of fear. At that moment, Donovan realized how precarious his entire empire was. Losing Elizabeth didn't just mean losing the facade of a happy marriage. It could also mean losing the moral anchor that had partially legitimatized his high society persona. Without Elizabeth, Donovan Pierce was just another scheming, heartless tycoon with questionable ethics and no family to give him depth or redemption. "Please," he murmured, voice raw. "Don't talk of divorce yet. Let me do whatever it takes to earn her trust back." Caroline exhaled sharply. "That's up to Elizabeth. For now, respect her wishes. If she wants to see you, fine. If she doesn't, you'll keep away." Donovan nodded, too grief-stricken to argue. The only thing that mattered now was Elizabeth's health and the safety of the twins. Little by little, he realized the irreparable damage he'd caused. If he ever wanted to regain Elizabeth's love, or even her tolerance, he would have to face an arduous road of restitution, if such a thing was even possible. The weekend passed in a blur. Elizabeth showed signs of improvement, though her emotional wounds were far from healed. Donovan took Caroline's advice and stayed mostly away, visiting briefly when Elizabeth gave the green light. He spent his nights at a penthouse suite in a nearby hotel, making calls to business associates and cancelling all non-essential trips. Serena Quinn, meanwhile, disappeared from his immediate orbit. He'd arranged for her to stay in a luxurious suite at the Ritz-Carlton, and he covered the tab without question. Their exchanges were reduced to terse text messages. She resented being sidelined, but had no choice. During this tumultuous period, Donovan discovered that personal crises had a way of exposing hidden vulnerabilities in his business empire. A damaging rumor circulated that he was stepping away from Pierce Capital Management due to family issues. Boards of directors, already anxious about market fluctuations, began to question the stability of Donovan's leadership. Some clients hinted they might shift their funds elsewhere if Donovan couldn't personally oversee their accounts. In the midst of these professional woes, Donovan received an unexpected visitor, Rita Halberd, a young journalist from a prominent financial magazine. Rita had sensed the scandal swirling around the Pierce household and wanted an exclusive story. She cornered Donovan in the hospital lobby, a polite but determined expression on her face. "Mr. Pierce, I'm so sorry to bother you at this difficult time." She began pressing the record button on her phone. "But rumors are circulating about trouble in your personal life affecting your company. Is there any comment you'd like to make?" Donovan forced a composed smile. "I don't discuss personal matters with the press, Miss Halberd. My family is my priority right now. Pierce Capital Management remains fully operational." Rita persisted. "Any truth to the allegations about an affair causing your wife's hospitalization?" His jaw clenched. No comment. When a security guard intervened, escorting Rita away, Donovan felt a jolt of dread. Despite his best attempts to keep the scandal under wraps, the story was leaking. He later discovered that paparazzi photos of him and Serena in Monte Carlo had been making rounds online, fueling speculation. The worst part was that Elizabeth's heartbreak was now tabloid fodder. Back at Beauclair Mansion, Elizabeth returned to recuperate under medical supervision. Her parents insisted on staying with her, but she also had some quiet moments to reflect. Late one afternoon, Elizabeth found her way to a seldom-used drawing room lined with dusty oil paintings of the estate's previous owners. There she sank into a velvet armchair, a cup of chamomile tea in hand. Her mind replayed the last few days, the confrontation, the hospital, scare, the taste of betrayal. She recalled times when Donovan had been tender and loving, such as the night he proposed. He had taken her to a small island off the coast of Croatia, where they strolled along a moonlit beach. He promised her a life of wonder and fulfillment. Now those sweet memories clashed with the stinging reality of his infidelity. She wondered if she had been naive, ignoring subtle warning signs all along. The late-night calls, the new cologne that smelled nothing like Donovan's usual preference, the random missing hours he could never fully explain. Perhaps she should have confronted him sooner. Perhaps she should have demanded he slow down, focus on their marriage, before it was too late. But regrets, she realized, could never undo the present. In a small burst of determination, Elizabeth pressed a hand against her belly. The twins moved gently, as if sensing her emotions. She whispered, "We'll be okay. With or without him, we'll make it." For all her heartbreak, Elizabeth realized she wasn't powerless. She had the children to think about, and her own dignity. If Donovan thought he could just walk in and out of their lives at will, he was mistaken. Serena Quinn, temporarily sequestered in the Ritz-Carlton, found that the novelty of plush robes and room service quickly waned when tethered to a scandal. She felt like a caged bird, feeding on scraps of reassurance from Donovan's sporadic texts. "We'll talk soon," he would say, or "Need time to handle family matters." Weeks ago, Serena would have found these messages acceptable, even promising. Now they felt dismissive. She resented being treated as an inconvenient afterthought. One evening, in a fit of frustration, she sought out an old friend in the city, a PR specialist named Miranda Vale. Over cocktails, Serena vented about her predicament, the broken promises, the mansion fiasco, and her uncertain future. Miranda listened with rapt attention, occasionally nodding or taking a sip of her martini. "You're so worried about Donovan's image," Miranda observed. "But what about yours? You stand to lose modeling contracts if this scandal blows up. Or you might actually use it to your advantage if you play your cards right." Serena bristled. She wasn't looking to become some gossip sensation. Yet the suggestion swirled in her mind. How could she salvage her own life? Maybe even elevate her status from this mess. A few days later, Miranda set up a clandestine meeting with a tabloid journalist, Kevin Brown, who was offering top dollar for an exclusive interview from the other woman. Serena vacillated. Did she really want to risk Donovan's wrath by selling their story? But the more Donovan ignored her calls, and the more anxious she felt about her livelihood, the more tempting the offer became. Finally, after one particularly icy text from Donovan, "I can't talk right now." "Please stop calling," Serena snapped. She had built her entire adult life on leveraging opportunities. Why should Donovan Pierce escape unscathed, preserving his marriage and reputation, while leaving her hung out to dry? So Serena met with Kevin Brown in a posh rooftop lounge, wearing oversized sunglasses and a scarf to hide her identity. She demanded a sizable sum for any details about her affair with Donovan Pierce. Kevin, practically salivating at the prospect of a sensational scoop, agreed. Over hours and multiple drinks, Serena spilled enough intimate details to fuel a front-page headline in every major tabloid. She revealed their first meeting in Monaco, the hush-hush texts, the gifts, the clandestine weekends. The only thing she kept vague was the fiasco at Beauclair Mansion. Some details, she reasoned, might prove too dangerous or humiliating if fully exposed. By the time she left, the weight on Serena's shoulders felt partially lifted. She knew the story would break soon, that Donovan would likely feel betrayed and furious, but she also knew she needed to watch out for her own interests. If Donovan wasn't going to make good on his unspoken promises, if he was going to return to Elizabeth and freeze Serena out, then maybe Serena could seize control of the narrative. In a world where wealth and reputation meant everything public sympathy could be leveraged, perhaps in the end, she'd emerge from the scandal not as a regretful mistress, but as a cunning survivor. A week later, the tabloids erupted with headlines. Exclusive model Serena Quinn speaks out on Donovan Pierce affair. The public devoured every detail like vultures on fresh carrion. Pictures of Serena in Monaco in Donovan's penthouse and near Beauclair Mansion splashed across websites and social media feeds. Gossip shows debated the morality of powerful men who think they can have it all. Stock pundits speculated whether Pierce Capital Management would suffer a mass exodus of clients. Donovan woke up to a flurry of panicked calls from business partners, lawyers, and friends. Fury coursed through him at Serena's betrayal. He drafted multiple messages to her, each more accusatory than the last. But he never pressed send. He understood that escalation could lead to more damaging revelations. Instead, he pivoted into damage control, a meeting with his legal team to discuss defamation suits, a press statement asserting that personal matters do not affect the integrity of Pierce Capital's mission, and frantic phone calls to major stakeholders, reassuring them he was still firmly at the helm. Elizabeth, meanwhile, read the tabloids with disgust and heartbreak. She had heard enough from Donovan's admissions and the partial truths gleaned from staff at Beauclair. But seeing Serena's smug face on the covers made it all more real. Her parents tried to shield her from the media storm, but the magnitude was impossible to ignore. At one point, Elizabeth snapped at Caroline. "No more. I don't want to hear or see anything about that woman. It's my life, my marriage. I'll decide how to handle it." Yet a part of Elizabeth felt a strange, unexpected relief. The entire truth was now out there, no more secrets lurking. Donovan's humiliating betrayal was an open wound. Sometimes honesty, even when dragged unwillingly into the public eye, can mark the beginning of genuine healing or a definitive end. A few days into the media circus, Donovan managed to speak privately with Elizabeth at Beauclair. She was seated in the sunroom, a blanket over her lap, the warm glow of afternoon light shining through large glass windows. Her pregnancy was still precarious, but stable. A nurse milled about, ensuring Elizabeth's comfort. Donovan took a seat across from her, hands clasped. He looked thinner than usual, his eyes hollow with regret. "Elizabeth," he began, voice quivering. "I know I can never fully undo what I've done. But I want you to know I'm willing to do anything to make this right." She regarded him with a calmness that unnerved him. "You can't unbreak a heart, Donovan," she replied. "You can only see what grows from the pieces left behind." He swallowed hard, remembering the luminous woman he had married. The thought of losing her and the children shredded whatever bravado remained. "I'm committed to therapy, to counseling, anything you need. You and the twins are my priority now. I understand if you hate me, or if you'll never trust me again. But I want to try." Elizabeth let out a slow exhale. "I don't have answers yet. I need time to figure out what's best for me, and for our children. Right now, I need stability, no more public scandals, no more late-night cat-and-mouse games." "Can you promise me that much?" "Yes," Donovan whispered, tears pricking his eyes. "I promise." Elizabeth nodded. "Then give me space. Provide what I need for the babies and me. Maybe in time, We'll see if there's anything left of this marriage to salvage." Donovan rose to leave, feeling the smallest glimmer of hope. He bent down gently, kissed Elizabeth's forehead. She didn't resist, but neither did she reciprocate. He walked away with a reverent hush in his chest, determined to do better, uncertain if redemption was truly within reach. The next several months were a crucible of transformation for everyone involved. Elizabeth stayed at Beauclair Mansion, supported by private nurses and her parents. She meticulously prepared for the twins' arrival, reading parenting books, setting up a nursery, and confiding in a therapist recommended by her obstetrician. She recognized that despite Donovan's betrayal, her children deserved a father if he could prove worthy. Yet she also realized she was no longer the passive partner she might once have been. She contacted divorce lawyers, not as a definitive move, but as a precaution. Boundaries had to be drawn. Donovan embarked on a public apology tour, though not the typical kind with press conferences. Instead, he quietly reached out to key figures in his professional circle, explaining that he was going through a personal crisis and assuring them of his unwavering commitment to Pierce Capital. He donated a significant sum to maternal health charities, a gesture partly inspired by guilt, partly by a genuine desire to mend the harm. In a rare display of humility, he sought out a private counselor, a stepsister of a friend. Sessions were grueling, forcing him to confront his reckless impulses, his childhood insecurities, and the toxic pursuit of wealth as a balm for every emotion. He began to see that the same drive that made him a financial success had also corroded his personal life. Serena, meanwhile, found herself both famous and infamous. She was approached by multiple agencies to exploit her new celebrity, but serious brands viewed her as a liability. She capitalized on her notoriety by launching a line of low-tier beauty products, hawked relentlessly on social media. Certain tabloids praised her for bravery in exposing a billionaire, but the more discerning corners of society labeled her a shameless opportunist. She struggled with the knowledge that she might never escape the shadow of this scandal. On lonely nights in her new penthouse, a parting gift from a short-lived romance with another wealthy patron, she questioned whether she had really gained anything from this affair, or simply sabotaged her own integrity. As for the public, the scandal became old news once another sensational headline captured their short attention span: Donovan Pierce and Elizabeth Radcliffe. Pierce were yesterday's gossip replaced by new controversies. However, the financial world did not forget so quickly. Donovan faced extra scrutiny in every new venture. Some of his bolder clients grew leery, no longer seeing him as infallible. He moved carefully, treading water to maintain his empire's stability, while balancing the turbulent waters of his personal life. On a chilly December evening, months after the scandal first broke, Elizabeth went into labor. The staff at Beauclair hustled, calling the doctor and preparing to take her to the hospital. Donovan, who was in Manhattan finalizing a major business deal, was alerted immediately. Without hesitation, he dropped everything. He had a private helicopter on standby for emergencies, and this was certainly one. Within an hour, Donovan arrived at the hospital breathless and terrified. He found Elizabeth already in the delivery room, her face contorted with pain, her parents at her side. She spotted Donovan, and a fleeting look of relief crossed her features before another contraction seized her. All through the grueling hours, Donovan held Elizabeth's hand. Each time she cried out, he whispered words of encouragement, telling her how strong she was, how close they were to finally holding their children. If she bore any lingering resentment, it was eclipsed by the primal, overwhelming task of giving birth. At precisely 2:14 a.m., the first baby emerged a boy, with tiny flailing limbs and a robust cry. The doctor smiled. "He's healthy," she announced, placing the newborn on Elizabeth's chest. A minute later, his twin sister followed, smaller, but equally vocal about her entrance into the world. Donovan was unable to contain his tears as he beheld his children for the first time. He kissed Elizabeth's forehead, flooding with gratitude, regret, and awe all at once. Elizabeth turned to look at him, tears in her own eyes, and gave a single nod of acknowledgement. It was too soon to say if forgiveness was in the cards, but at that moment they were bound by the pure miracle of these new lives. In the weeks following the twins' birth, a cautious détente settled over Beauclair Mansion. Elizabeth allowed Donovan to stay in a guest suite. He took paternal leave from Pierce Capital, focusing on midnight feedings, diaper changes, and singing lullabies. The cracks in their relationship remained, but caring for their infants forged a tenuous bridge. The twins, named Alexander and Amelia, became the center of everyone's world. Donovan discovered that holding these fragile beings in his arms gave him a sense of purpose far beyond financial gain. Some nights he'd find Elizabeth gazing at him, a flicker of surprise in her eyes at how dedicated a father he'd become. Other nights, tensions rose particularly when the memory of his betrayal loomed. But the babies acted as a balm, reminding both parents that they had two tiny reasons to try. Elizabeth's parents helped, but eventually they returned to their own estate, trusting that Elizabeth was strong enough now to stand on her own. A wave of quiet negotiations began between Elizabeth's legal team and Donovan's lawyers' discussions about trusts for the children, potential separation agreements, property, settlements. Yet Elizabeth remained non-committal about a final decision. She sought more clarity on Donovan's sincerity before making her choice. At times, Donovan found himself on the edge of losing patience. He wanted redemption, wanted Elizabeth to declare that they could fully reconcile. But each time he felt that eagerness, he reminded himself that trust once shattered cannot be hastily mended. He forced himself to give Elizabeth space to keep proving day by day that he could be the man she and their children deserved. And so life took on a quiet rhythm. Nighttime feedings under the mansion's vaulted ceilings, squeals of newborn laughter in the morning, and guarded conversations in the afternoon. Donovan learned that fatherhood wasn't just a new label, it was an all-consuming transformative role. And Elizabeth, for all her heartbreak, found moments of solace watching Donovan cradle their infants, singing lullabies in a soft, unsteady voice she'd never heard from him before. Winter gradually yielded to spring, bringing fresh growth to Beauclair's gardens. Sunlight filtered through newly budded branches, and the estate's fountain sparkled under warmer skies. The twins reached 3 months old, their personalities beginning to blossom. Alexander was feisty, always squirming, while Amelia was calmer, observing the world with large, curious eyes. One afternoon, after putting the twins down for a nap, Donovan and Elizabeth found themselves alone in the mansion's reading room. The subdued light cast gentle shadows on the library shelves. It was the first time in weeks they'd had a private moment uninterrupted by crying babies or house staff. Elizabeth studied Donovan for a long moment. "I've seen a change in you," she said quietly. He felt his chest tighten. "I've never been more serious about anything. These months with the twins with you, they've shown me what really matters." Elizabeth pressed her lips together, tears threatening to surface. "I don't trust you fully yet," she admitted, voice trembling. "But I see you trying. And I care that our children have a real family." Donovan reached for her hand. She allowed him to take it this time, though her grip was tentative. "I love you," he said with fervor. "I always have in my own flawed way." She closed her eyes, letting tears slip through. In that vulnerable moment, Elizabeth acknowledged that despite the immense pain Donovan had caused, she still loved him too. Love wasn't a neat equation. It was messy, painful, beautiful, and worth fighting for sometimes. No magical instant of absolute forgiveness followed. Instead, they shared a deep, trembling embrace. Perhaps it was the start of building anew, or maybe a final farewell. But for that moment, it was enough to close the distance that had been tearing them apart. Over time, marriage counseling sessions were arranged. Trust exercises, honest conversations, and raw confessions filled many evenings. Donovan penned a heartfelt letter to Elizabeth, acknowledging every lie and vow he had broken. Elizabeth read it through tears, then wrote a response describing her own fears and disappointments. Though the future remained uncertain, both were willing to try. For the sake of the twins, for the sake of their own hearts, they forged ahead, cautious, hopeful, and forever changed. Months passed gradually, healing old wounds, though scars lingered. Donovan and Elizabeth decided to continue living at Beauclair, turning it into a sanctuary rather than a battlefield. The staff treated Donovan with polite reserve, aware of the rift in the household, but also noticing the genuine effort he invested in fatherhood. Serena Quinn drifted to the periphery of their lives. She launched a small cosmetics brand online, capitalizing on her short-lived tabloid fame, but her presence receded from major headlines. Donovan never reached out to her, and she, sensing no benefit to further contact, eventually moved on to new opportunities. Rumors linked her to an international art dealer, but the story never garnered much attention. In time, the media found fresh scandals to chase. Donovan's public persona stabilized as he demonstrated consistent leadership in his company, all the while making philanthropic gestures, no doubt influenced by Elizabeth's passions. Some cynics claimed he was simply buying redemption, but those closer to him sensed that fatherhood and near loss had sparked a more meaningful shift. Elizabeth remained cautious. Though she allowed Donovan back into her bed, she set firm boundaries about honesty and transparency. She demanded and received proof of Donovan's finances, phone records, and schedules. Some nights, guilt gnawed at Donovan. He realized how easily he used to lie and manipulate. Now each day of truth felt like a small victory. In the hush of dawn, Donovan often rose to check on Alexander and Amelia. He found solace in their innocent breathing, their tiny bodies nestled securely in cribs. As he watched them, he whispered apologies for his past and promises for their future. Each promise was a vow to be better, a father they could respect, a husband Elizabeth could count on. Exactly 1 year after Donovan's fateful return to Beauclair, with Serena in tow, Elizabeth woke before sunrise. She gazed at Donovan sleeping beside her, his hair disheveled, his face peaceful in slumber. She slipped out of bed and tiptoed to the twins' nursery. Sunlight broke over the horizon, illuminating Alexander's curious expression and Amelia's gentle coos. Elizabeth scooped them into her arms, one on each hip, and felt a rush of gratitude so strong it nearly overwhelmed her. Shortly after, Donovan entered, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Morning," he said softly, placing a tender kiss on each baby's forehead. Then he looked at Elizabeth, searching her face for signs of acceptance. She offered a small smile. The tension that once gripped their every interaction had eased, replaced by a quiet understanding. They carried the twins downstairs to the breakfast table, where the staff prepared a light meal. Over coffee and pureed fruit for the babies, Elizabeth cleared her throat. "I have an announcement," she said, drawing Donovan's full attention. "I'm ready to give us a real chance. No more guest suite, no more half measures. But Donovan, if you ever betray me again, that's it. We're done. He felt the air rush from his lungs, relief washing over him. I won't. I promise. He reached across the table and gently squeezed her hand. Their eyes locked in a moment of unspoken agreement. Months of therapy, raw conversations, and unwavering devotion to their children had led them here, still bruised but willing to live as a unified family. The rebuilding process had been painstaking each day, a test of Donovan's sincerity and Elizabeth's capacity for forgiveness. In that single instant, they both chose hope over resentment, a future over a fractured past. From the brink of a devastating split to a fragile but genuine renewal, Donovan and Elizabeth's journey reminds us that no life is beyond repair, even in the face of betrayal, heartbreak, and public scandal. Sometimes the hardest lessons come wrapped in pain and regret, but it's how we grow from them that truly defines our story. Through newborn cries and sleepless nights, they discovered a new depth of love and unity, proving that second chances, while never guaranteed, can blossom if nurtured with honesty and perseverance. If this story moved you, if it made you reflect on the power of forgiveness, the complexity of desire, or the resilience of family, please share it with someone who might need the message. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more compelling stories that shine a light on the raw, dramatic twists of life. After all, every life holds a chapter that can inspire someone else's healing.